Hey there nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and we're back with another episode of Way of the Underhive. This series is dedicated to helping brand new players to Necromunda build their starting rosters and learn more about the game mechanics of their favorite gangs. And on today's episode, we will be discussing Wyrd Powers introduced by the various editions of Necromunda. We'll discuss each Wyrd Power in detail, give our thoughts of the abilities, and explain how it can be used to help you to achieve victory in your next battle report. So these next few series of videos, we're going to get kind of weird. We're going to be talking about Psykers and their roles in Necromunda. We'll also give you a little bit of a briefing of what the Psyker rules detail in this game setting. We'll also talk about, in quite a bit, all the Wyrd powers that are available in Necromunda as well. We'll talk about each one of those individual abilities and how best to use those in your campaigns and as well as your games on the tabletop. We'll also provide our conclusive thoughts on what we think about this Wyrd power set. And because this video will be a little bit more of a deeper dive, I will put timestamps in the description box down below so that way you can click and navigate to the part of the video that interests you the most. So that being said, let's talk about Wyrd powers. Alright, so give you the rundown real fast of Psykers and Necromunda. First of all, willpower characteristic is going to be key because the lower the willpower score is for your character, the easier it's going to be for them in order to trigger these mental abilities off. Think of it, you basically take 2d6 and you gotta either match or beat the willpower score for your character. Now, about a 7+ willpower is going to basically give you a 50-50 odds of whether you can get your Wyrd powers off or not. You want to be more like in the 6, the 5, the 4 levels, so that way you can continually get your Wyrd powers off, statistically speaking, at a higher level. And of course, if you can't get that low with your willpower scores to either upgrading your character, you could also do so with some very simple actions you can take in the actual tabletop to help you. For example, every single one of these characters do come with the power called Maintain Control. It is a simple action and it's used for continuous effect Wyrd powers that you might use. All you gotta do, of course, is take a willpower test with a 3+ modifier attached to it. If you manage to beat that score, the ability still keeps on going, otherwise it immediately ends. At the same time, if you do need a little bit of boost to your willpower test, you can take a concentrate action with your Psykers, and what that basically is a basic action that adds +1 to your willpower test the next time you roll it. At the same time, you do have to watch out for Perils of the Warp. If you manage to roll Snake Eyes when you roll for your powers, there's a couple of bad things that can happen to your characters, kind of like miscasting for your magic in Warhammer the Old World. At the same time, if you have rival Psykers in the opposing gang, of course, all they gotta do is roll 2d6 as well and beat your willpower test. And they're able to do so, that means they disrupt your power and your ability doesn't go off either. Now, when it comes to the Perils of the Warp, however, like I said before, double ones is the way you actually trigger that event, and it can actually be quite devastating for your Psykers. But we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail here in a second. Lastly, you have two types of Psykers in your gangs. You have a sanctioned Psyker, which is nice because you get to re-roll 1 willpower test per battle, which could be extremely useful. Having that ability to re-roll could be proved quite critical if a situation warrants it. Also, you have for most of your fighters, you'll have what's called the non-sanctioned Psyker special rule, which means if your character gets taken out of action, your opponent earns D3 times 10 credits in order to do so, because they're wanted, dead or alive, basically. And if they get captured, they can be immediately sold if captured as well, so you won't be able to get them back in a rescue mission if that does happen. And lastly, the coolest thing about these game mechanics, of course, is your Psyker's ability to access force weapons. Force weapons are actually just normal mundane melee weapons, but if a post-battle action where you do a sign attunement, if you actually pass that roll, you could actually add the power trait as well as a server trait to your force weapons, and that only works in the hands of a Psyker. So for those of you guys who are looking for some ways to make your Psykers even deadlier, may I suggest giving them force weapons. Alright, so let's talk about Perils of the Warp. Whenever you roll double ones or a double 6 when making a willpower test to perform a Wyrd power action, you might actually get the Perils of the Warp, right? So let's go and talk about what that ends up being. You end up rolling a 2d6, and you get one of basically 5 possibilities. If you roll a 2 to 3, you get what's called a tear in reality, and what that rule states is that the Psyker loses control and warp energy tears reality apart around them. Center a 5-inch blast marker on the Psyker. Any model touched by the marker must pass a willpower test, or lose a wound, or suffer driver wounded effect, and the Psyker then goes out of action. On a 4 through 5, you have the Immaterium inverse. The warps inverts upon the attempting to control it, the Psyker becomes a target of power regardless of range. If the power is beneficial, the Psyker instead becomes prone and pinned and suffers a strength 6 hit that inflicts 2 damage, ignoring armor saves, and the power has no further effects. On a roll of 6 or 8, you get Whispers of the Warp. The Psyker's mind is filled with screaming demonic voices. The Psyker becomes subject to the Insane condition. Place an insanity marker on the Psyker's fighter card and roll d6 on the Insane table when they activate. On a 9 through 10, you get Warp Surge. The Psyker's power becomes overcharged with warp energy. The Psyker may immediately try to manifest the same power again as a free action, or if they're trying to disrupt the power, they may immediately manifest one of their own powers as a free action. This additional manifestation of the power can trigger Perils of the Warp as normal. After working out the effects of the power, the Psyker becomes prone and pinned and suffers a strength 4 hit, which inflicts 1 damage. And lastly, from 11 through 12, you have Demonic Possession. Demonic energy courses through the Psyker's body. The Psyker increases their movement, strength, toughness, as well as attack characteristics all by 3, and their weapon skill to 2+. The unarmed attacks inflict 2 damage and have an AP of -1. In the end phase of the following round, or if the Psyker generates this result again, they go out of action. So as you can see, some pretty crazy things can happen with Perils of the Warp as well. It triggers either on a double 1 or a double 6 when you actually try to do willpower tests before Wyrd Power, or when attempting to disrupt a Wyrd Power. So psychic abilities are quite nice, but player beware, there are some consequences if you mess up. Alright, so let's talk about the Pyromancy Discipline real quick and how it basically fits within your gang. The Pyromancy Discipline is primarily an offensive psychic discipline, with a few defensive as well as buff powers as well. However though, it's really designed for combat-oriented Psyker. You're pretty much going to be doing close quarters battle, usually fighting within the 6 to 12 inch range for shooting attacks, and melee in close combat as well. So my recommendation for you is if you're going to take the Pyromancy skill, put it on a fighter that's going to be really up into the clinch. Something, for example, like a Psygeist from House Delac would be a perfect example of using Pyromancy for, or actually creating a specific fighter with this discipline in mind by giving them some really good close combat attacks as well as some really decent armor save, so that way they can be a little bit more survivable in combat. So let's talk about the Pyromancer special ability. If a Wyrd only selects powers from the Pyromancy Discipline, they gain the Fire Shield special rule. And the Fire Spell special rule reads as, this fighter cannot be set on fire. In other words, this fighter is immune to the blaze condition and will never become subject to it. Now, blaze attacks are actually very common in Necromunda, and having immune to it is an amazing buff to have for your fighter. Just because House Condor fighters have it, people use incendiary charges, people use flamers of all different types. So send your Psyker in to deal with that threat. So if you're facing against an enemy that has a flamer of any sort, this is the guy you want to send in to take point, because they're never going to be harmed by that blaze technique. And equip this fighter with something other than a hazard suit. So because of that, you can give them some really good armor, like mesh armor or armored undersuits, for example, even like carapace armor, because with that Fire Shield ability, you'll never have to worry about blaze. So let's go and talk about your powers. Power number 1 is Body of Flame. It is a basic action to cast with a continuous effect, and the rules read, this Wyrd's body bursts into flames. While this Wyrd power is maintained, the fighter ignores hits from weapons with the blaze or melted traits. In addition, if a fighter ends their activation within 1 inch of this fighter, they must test to see if they are set on fire, as if they have been hit by a weapon with the blaze trait. Now, you're automatically immune to blaze even if you're not a Pyromancer, which is kind of nice as well. So if you decide to be one of those kind of Psykers where you can choose multiple abilities for multiple disciplines and you don't choose to specialize into one, this would be a great way to actually make your fighter a little bit immune to blaze attacks. Now, if you do specialize in Pyromancy, you automatically get Fire Shield, but this is also quite nice because at the same time you're immune to the melted trait, which is also kind of like a nice little boost to that as well. And this ability, unfortunately, is only really good, though, when you're using it with it surrounded by enemies, because if you have enemies within 1 inch of you, basically, they have to test to see if they get blazed as well. Now, from the way the rules are written, unfortunately, this rule also applies to fighters who are also friendly fighters within you. So you have a 50-50 chance of setting enemies running, screaming, and on fire is always a fun time. So I would kind of basically use this if you're going to be assaulting forward, and then because you're using a close combat oriented fighter or a close quarters battle fighter to create this psychic ability, that's got to probably be the one you want to do. So you want to close in the distance so that way you can set your enemies afire, but unfortunately means you also got to keep your Psyker by themselves, which could be kind of risky. Power number 2 is Stoke Flames. It is a basic action to cast, and with a gesture, the Wyrd causes flames to roar to life and from the smallest embers. Choose an enemy fighter that is both within 18 inches and line of sight of this fighter, and that is currently subject to the blaze condition. Center a 5-inch blast cover over the chosen fighter. All fighters touched by this marker must immediately test to see if they are set on fire, just as they have been hit by a weapon with the blaze trait. Now, unfortunately, this power is very situational. Now, the 18-inch range is nice, and so is the 5-inch blast template is also nice, but unfortunately, you need line of sight in order to use this as well, and that might not always be the case because whenever enemies catch on fire, they kind of run around randomly, so you have no way of knowing where this guy is going to go. So that's the problem, which makes it so situational. Ideally, your enemy who's actually on fire runs back towards their friends, so that way you can see them and then trigger this ability and make a big 5-inch blast template, but the situation really needs to be right in order to maximize this, and that's why it's not so great. However though, if you get that 1 in a million chance where it does line up, it's going to be absolutely amazing when your enemy is caught on fire and they're running around like maniacs with their heads chopped off. Power number 3 is Wall of Flame. It is a basic action with a continuous effect. Fire erupts from the air to engulf an area of the battlefield. Place a 5-inch blast marker so that it is centered anywhere that is both in 12 inches and line of sight of this fighter. Once placed, this marker does not move, but will remain in place while the Wyrd power is maintained. Any fighter that either begins or ends their activation touching the marker suffers a Strength 3, Damage 1, AP 1 hit as if a weapon from the Blaze trait. Now, the nice thing about this power is a good defensive power in order to isolate an area of the battlefield from an enemy. My idea is that it's good to put this on an objective to keep enemies away from it. It's also a good place to protect it on an exposed flank that you might have, or to block of an enemy approach. So for example, if you're playing on a Zone Mortalis board, you can use this on an intersection that's kind of critical to prevent enemies from moving through it. Plus that 5-inch blast template is quite nice too because it covers a very large area. Now, the only downside, of course, is that the attack is only Strength 3 with -1 AP and 1 damage, but the real reason why you're taking it is because you run a 50-50 chance of setting enemies at fire, and they become subject to the blaze condition, and that's the reason why you really want to take this. Power number 4 is Flame Blast. It is a basic action to cast and it has a continuous effect. Flames envelop one of the Wyrd's weapons, causing anything touched by it to be similarly burst into fire. While this Wyrd power is maintained, one weapon with the melee or versatile trait carried by this fighter gains the Blaze trait. Now, having flaming melee attacks are no longer the exclusivity to House Khaldor with this one. You can pretty much have the same kind of fun that Khaldor gangs usually have with their pyromantic mantles. So if you're building a combat-oriented Psyker, this is actually really good power to use to set enemies on fire because now your close combat attacks cause a Blaze trait. My suggestion is to put this on a close combat attack with a versatile trait of some sort, something like a whip for example, or maybe some kind of pole arm or great sword, something that has some reach, that way you can set enemies on fire all around you. That way they run a 50-50 chance of being subject to the Blaze trait and also running away from you as well. So once again, a really decent power, especially if you're making a combat oriented Psyker. Power number 5 is Molten Bolt. It is a basic action to cast, and this fighter lets loose a superheated bolt of energy. Target a single enemy fighter that is both in 6 inches and line of sight of this fighter and make a hit roll using the fighter's ballistic skill. If a hit is scored, it results at Strength 8, Damage 3, -3 AP as if a weapon from the Melted trait. Now, if you want a free short-range melted gun in your gang, but you don't want to pay for one, Molten Bolt is your answer. The only thing about it that's bad is that it relies upon the Psyker's ballistic skill as well as a 6-inch range. However though, it could be a really useful ability to have. You could take on brutes, you could take on vehicles, you could take on high value enemy targets, you could take on missions that require you to destroy something with a high toughness or a high wound count, and you could also use this on your enemies and watch them melt to death as well. So it is a really powerful ability. The only handicap, like I said before, is this 6-inch range and using line of sight and ballistic skill, but still, it's like packing a Palka-sized melted gun, which is all kinds of fantastic. And lastly, power number 6 is the Scouring. It is a basic action to cast with a continuous effect, and the rule states that opening their mouth in a silent roar, the fighter vomits fire. While this Wyrd power is maintained, this fighter counts as being armed with the following weapon. It is a Strength 2 template attack that causes 1 damage and also has the Blaze characteristic. It is an auto-hitting flamer at Strength 2 with 1 damage. Now, Granted, it only may be strength 2, but the real reason why you want this ability is because there's a 50-50 chance of setting enemies on fire. And it's a good defensive power, especially if you're being attacked or if someone's coming towards you to attack your Psyker. So pop off this template attack, it automatically hits, which means it'll automatically pin as well. Plus it's strength 2, so you do stand a chance of actually winning somebody. And you also set people on fire, which is an absolutely fantastic thing to use for crowd control. So in conclusion, Pyromancy is a solid combat-oriented psychic discipline, especially if you're making a close quarters combat or a close quarters battle-oriented Psyker, especially if you're fighting in close combat or within short shooting distance. It's a nice series of combat as well as defensive buffs, and you also have some really good environmental control as well. When it comes to this discipline, Blaze is the name of the game for this power, because what you want to do is set people on fire, cause them to scatter, so that we have good crowd control on the tabletop as well. Now, if I was to rank these powers from the most useful to the least useful, this is the list I would recommend. I would go with Molten Bolt, just because a short range flamer attack is always kind of fun with a melta attack. Same thing with Scouring. Granted, it's a weaker flamer, but it's still a flamer and it can still do its job. After that, Flame Blast is actually a really good one as well, followed by Wall Flame, so that way you could use melee close combat would be have blaze attacks, and then Wall of Flame can isolate parts of the battlefield from your enemy. Body of Flames is also quite nice too, so that way you can cause enemies within 1 inch of you to become subject to blaze. And probably the least useful one is Stoke Flames, just because you don't know where your enemy is going if they are subject to the blaze condition, and it's got really limited usage in my opinion. So there you guys have it. That's good to this one. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is invaluable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as blogger.com for all the latest greatest hobby news related to this channel. I am Commander Cheapskate. I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace out and stay classy.